welcome to the Global Blockchain Business Council's University Dialogues. This University Dialogue is going to be focused on Web3 and non-fungible tokens. And I'd like to begin by thanking our academic partners for their help producing this edition of the University Dialogues. We've partnered with American University's Kogod School of Business, University of Arkansas's Blockchain Center of Excellence, and Florida Tech Center for Innovation Management and Business Analytics. Thanks to the faculty there who have supported on coordinating this event, and to all the students joining from those institutions and beyond. We're really looking forward to a fruitful and insightful discussion on Web3 and NFTs. We're going to dive into these developments, what they mean for the industry, and what this also means for users, creators, and enterprises. We're really pleased to have brought together a very impressive lineup of industry leaders, and the purpose of this conversation is to dive deeper into these two topics, but also answer your questions. If you have any questions about how you can get involved in the industry, we're welcome to take those as well. So you can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And as a not so shameful plug, I'll mention that the GBBC has released a job board featuring the opportunities at many of these companies. So I'll drop a link into the chat as well, and you can check that out. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'll hand things over to our moderator, GBBC's COO, Marcina Tillman. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophia, for kicking us off. And I'm really excited to be here with this cohort of incredible contributors to the ecosystem who I think will offer a really phenomenal kind of holistic view on these hot topics. So to get things started, I want to start in a very rudimentary place. Fundamentally, can someone please explain what Web3 is and why everyone is so excited about it?
Sure, I'm happy to volunteer, and anybody can add to that as well. You know, for the viewers, Web 1 was really at the outset the creation of the internet, and it was static web pages where you could go look at information that people posted. Web 2, which is really the dominant form of the internet today, is things like social media, the interactions, social posts, mobile. And Web 3 is this next stage of evolution, which I think there's a lot of various definitions for Web 3, but the way I would define it is as the intersection between cryptocurrency, blockchain, and the internet. And it's really that in the past, while you could make money off the internet, it was really the economic systems from the physical world that we're being linked to. Web 3 really provides the opportunity for these sort of digital ecosystems and economies to start being created. And this is the tokenization of assets. These are things like the creation of economies within the metaverse and, of course, NFTs.
And since you brought it up in very good form, can someone go into what NFTs are? And again, why are folks so excited about them right now? They've existed for a while, but there's been this incredible fervor over the last year. Dave, I see you nodding and unmuted. Would you mind taking that one for us?
Yeah, sure. And just I thought Andrew set it up well. You know, if we let me offer you know two kind of points of framing for this next version of the internet, right? It's internet of place, which is I think predicated very much on massive advancements on the XR side, and just as Andrew is referencing, internet of ownership, right? And that whole notion of internet of ownership being predicated on the thing that's changed from a technology perspective is that for the first time ever, we can establish provably unique objects that can have definitive ownership in the digital world. Right? Everything heretofore is subject to copy and paste and messaging and reconciliation, and someone else has to tell you that you're the owner of the thing in the digital world. And now suddenly, through the notion of tokenization, and I will offer into maybe some of the dialogue here, fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens, both as being super important as we press forward into the construct of the broad capability of tokenizing digital objects that then, carry with them that provable uniqueness and provable ownership. And then the third dimension of actually being able to embed business logic into them. This is what's underpinning, starting with the cryptocurrency movement, the redefinition of money, and digital currency and stable coins and central bank digital currency. It's redefining everything we're seeing around the NFT space with, starting with collectibles, but then more and more will move to more functional dimensions of what those new digital objects can do.
And I'd love to drill down even a bit more on this NFT space, since it is the topic of our conversation. I've heard a lot of conversations and a lot of questions from folks who are joining today about why this is different, why these certificates of ownership matter, why we can't just take a picture of an NFT and say we own it, even if we don't have that certificate. Can anyone speak to that a little bit more on some of the social movements that have been surrounding some of this NFT activity?
I will fill the silence, but I don't want to hog the mic. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, I can sort of talk to that. I would say that, when you think about NFTs, they're not too different from your traditional collectibles that you see already, like in terms of like physical collectibles, right? The same mentality that you think about when I collect a physical item, whether it's an investment, social status, or being able to support the artist, or having like an emotional attachment towards that piece. That same mentality that you have towards why you would purchase a physical asset carries over when you kind of think about digital assets too. The big difference being that, like right now, for a lot of the people, when they think about digital assets, it's about the type of content that goes through social media or YouTube, where a lot of it is easily accessible. Anybody can just, kind of view it and consume it, right? So for a lot of people, when they think about digital ownership, hey, it's like I can go there, just view it. If I want to save it, I can just right click and save it. It's on my device. And that to a lot of people is digital ownership. Which is not the same thing as what we're talking about with NFTs, where it is provable, where you can verify that someone specifically owns it, right? And so where the correlation exists with physical collectibles is like, how do you attribute value to physical collectibles? You need to be able to authenticate that the item is real, that it has originality to it, right? So take a physical trading card, for instance. There's millions of them out there. But say like an athlete comes along and autographs one of those cards, as long as you can authenticate that card, that's the thing that's going to increase that value of that card, right? So that same idea applies when it comes to NFTs as well, where there's a bunch of digital content out there that can be copied and replicated. But when you publish that content onto the blockchain, thereby creating an NFT, the digital signature from that creator is going to be permanently associated with that piece. And as long as you can authenticate that, that signature is real, that's the thing that's going to help to increase the value of that piece. So in a way, you can kind of think about it as like a digital autograph version of what sort of already exists in the physical world.
Yeah, one thing to add to that is for a lot of people, they have a hard time, and this is really to the heart of what Web3 is. For many people, in order for something to have value, it needs to have a physical form. What Web3 is really about, in my mind, is the ability to have actual assets that exist but only live on the internet. And it's the blockchain, which is really a public ledger of ownership, that allows this to happen. And so, when you think about an NFT, think about it as a digital object or a digital signature that is unique, it is scarce, it is irreplaceable, that can be moved around, it's transferable, can be attached to things like a video, a graphic, or something else that can be stored on the blockchain so that you can verify the ownership and the authenticity of it. And that's really what is this evolution that's happening with Web3, which is this, as Dave said, it's this transfer to having digital ownership, that it's not just physical things that can have scarcity and be unique and irreplaceable. It can also be things that live solely on the internet and are digital.
That's really helpful.
And it's also important to extend it, right? The collectible space is just the beginning, right? We are, we're working with core capital markets infrastructure players around the world right now to tokenize securities, equities, and bonds, right? And be able to have those, instead of we moved in the late 90s, early 2000s from paper to electronic stock certificates. Now we're moving from electronic to tokenized. right? The title to your house, the digital twin of your car, right? The whole notion of adding more and more functionality and, to the whole notion of tokenizing objects, and then through that ownership, being able to offer new services and experiences and access and, and automation. This is truly going to transform most everything.
And Alam, I'd love to hear from your perspective and from VMware's perspective, how NFTs are changing the way businesses interact with consumers.
Yeah, I think this is good. I'm going to sort of piggyback on what David and Andrew already started on, right? And really, I think it's a big question. So maybe let me try and break it down a bit and start with the first principles. I think it's important to restate what we just said, right? Which is that these NFTs essentially are, cryptographic tokens that prove authenticity and ownership of digital assets. And these NFTs basically are serving as a certificate of authenticity. They're backed by math, they're living on a ledger, and it proves that the owner actually owns sort of this one-of-a-kind digital asset, right? And I think it's really important that people understand and internalize this sort of fundamental definition of what these NFTs are, right? And we can think about these NFTs as constructs or building blocks. There's Andrew made a point, right, that just like how a website is a construct, today businesses are treating these new constructs like NFTs in, let's say, simplistic terms, right? Just like how we thought about websites and static websites back in the early 90s. But websites evolved to be much more. They enabled e-commerce, they enabled video delivery, they enabled several other things. And we can envision, to sort of what Dave was hinting at, is that we can envision that these NFTs will also enable sort of a lot more things than what people are doing with them today. So what are businesses doing with them today, and how are they interacting with customers? It's really around deeper brand relationships that are essentially driven by these digital product line extensions. And collectibles is a major play here, right? Art, music, gaming objects, maybe even tickets. And through this notion of digital proof of ownership, these are enabling brands to have new customer experiences on these digital products. But these sort of first set of interactions, importantly, are where businesses are able to connect directly with their consumers without going through aggregation platforms, right? So that's sort of a big shift, even from a business and a brand perspective. And beyond this sort of initial entry point of digital goods and collectibles as a simplistic starting point, we can really sort of envision NFTs going much, much broader. Like, we talked about, a picture and what's the value of having the picture and the ownership. I think when we start thinking about this in terms of data, these examples become a bit more concrete. For example, my LinkedIn professional network graph, right? That's an NFT, could be an NFT. It's specific to me. I own it. I should be able to transfer it to any other platform that I go to, right? So when we think about ownership at that level of that type of an asset, it becomes much more clear than just, let's say, a picture, right? And what I think what I shared so far is B2C. They've hinted at this, but there's a whole B2B context around this, right? Where NFTs are enabling business interactions, transfer of value, you can think about as one key one. And this is sort of really around seamless transactions between businesses, platforms between businesses. This is where VMware is heavily focused. And you can imagine sort of on the B2B context, things around privacy, confidentiality, protective of sensitive information are also much more important than what we're seeing initially on the consumer side, right? So maybe just to sort of wrap this up, on the B2C front, I think the initial changes are, in terms of how customers drive or businesses drive deeper brand relationships with their customers through these collectibles and other things. On the B2B front, it's much more about seamless and trustworthy interactions with appropriate privacy, auditability, and other controls.
Thank you so much, Alam. And Dave, I'd love for you to go a little bit more in depth on what is driving this enterprise interest in NFTs.
I'm happy to do that, but Marta, we've been like dominating the mic here. Did you want to add to the previous topic?
Yeah, I want to get to Marta. I feel
Okay,
like
you
I
want me
want
to
to
do
do
this
this, and then I want to get into like the legal implications of all of this, because they're super important, and I have a ton of questions about
Yes,
that.
Dave, thank you. I will let you guys flesh all this out, and then I promise I will talk a ton about legal stuff, but I appreciate you. I very much appreciate you throwing it over to me.
what just what he says. So Marcina, sorry, just phrase it for me again.
I'm interested in the enterprise interest in NFTs and Accenture specifically, why this is a part of your remit right now.
Sure. So I founded our blockchain business back in 2015. I then actually brought together our blockchain and XR and quantum businesses a few years ago. And now, as of actually yesterday, we just my whole title's changed. We've announced yesterday the formation of our Metaverse Continuum business group, recognizing that all of these things play together to fundamentally reshape the entire continuum: consumer experiences, B2C, B2B. And the like. And so from an enterprise perspective, the industries that are impacted, it really is across the board. We're seeing as much engagement from the retail industry, where you see all of the examples of the tokenization of product and the creation of the whole new category of not you've traditionally had your physical product, and now you have your your augmented product with data that's augmenting the physical product. When you look through a device, whether it's just holding up your phone or putting a headset on, and now you have your the digital augmentation of a physical product, and then the digitally native products, which we've been talking about, all based on tokenization. And so for all of our retail, consumer goods, high tech clients, they are, you see amazing things that are starting to come out from the fashion industry, from the, we on our Tech Vision yesterday, we had one of the senior execs from L'Oreal talking about the future of beauty in the metaverse and tokenization and digital twins. We have supply chain clients looking at how do you envision, through the use of tokenization of people, objects, places, and things, how can you envision entire systems and then be able to not only manage those systems through those digital twins, but also drive additional control and new services and new products. The banking industry is on fire right now around bank and non-bank issued stable coins and the future of central bank digital currency and how to work with cryptocurrency as an asset class. So it really is quite pervasive that that across the board, and companies and enterprises are realizing there's a whole new product category. To Alim's point, there's a whole new way to engage with your clients, where that direct, trusted relationship can gain you direct access in whole new ways. We could spend an hour on the patterns of self-managed digital identity that underpin this, where we'll all carry around our digital wallets, into which we can carry tokenized identity credentials from your driver's license, passport, university degree, to your digital currency tokens, to your your NFT collectibles, or house title to your house, et cetera. This whole notion of accumulating and this pattern of self-management of digital objects really is pervasive across its enterprise impact, and then in service of clients and customers. And super important to realize that it's emanating from a whole different community than the enterprise community of the creator economy that's emerging, and what I think Rama was referencing earlier around the importance of that, and really the democratization of a lot of this, and the rethinking of intermediaries and the roles they play. I've just each one of those could be a long conversation, but there is material excitement across the corporate and enterprise space, because this fundamentally reshapes products and services.
Absolutely. And as it has reshaped products and services, I would argue the legal sphere has not kept pace, and regulation just cannot keep up with all of these different innovations. And I'm interested, Marta, to hear from your perspective, what does this mean for creators, and what does this mean for regulation? Because architecture of these NFTs, of these innovations, really matter. And I think a lot of people think they're getting something that is not actually written into the code. So I'd love to hear from your perspective how you're viewing this space and all of these innovations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a couple of big picture things going on with NFTs specifically, and the legal sphere. So one thing that I think is the most important, biggest headline that people don't necessarily understand when they're engaging with NFTs is that ownership of an NFT is not the same thing as ownership of the copyright in the image or video or whatever, in that sort of underlying work, right? So you certainly can transfer ownership of copyright in an image along with an NFT, but you don't necessarily need to do so. And so typically the way that that plays out is you have sort of terms of service for an individual marketplace. And that's really what's governing what's happening with the rights underlying that NFT. So just to give you one example, NBA Top Shots is one example where you have an NFT that you might purchase and you might own that NFT. And what that means is that there's a blockchain somewhere that says, associates your, your ownership with that particular piece of content. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily own the rights to that sort of GIF of that sports moment. And as an example there, their terms of service sort of will restrict your use of that. They'll give you a limited license to display it, but it restricts the use of that and doesn't let you, for example, use the GIF to advertise or market or sell products, right? Another example, one of the early NFTs is Cryptokitties. And for Cryptokitties, you may own a Cryptokitty, but again, you don't actually own copyright in the work. You have a license that permits in that case, certain commercial uses, but only up to a certain amount. So really the headline here is you certainly can get certain rights along with your NFTs, but you don't necessarily get them. When you buy an NFT, you're really just buying the fact that that particular piece of content is associated with your with you. The other big thing in NFTs that I work on in the legal space is sort of what happens to that. Where is that content being stored, right? So let's say you own you own an NFT of a particular image and you click on, that image, where is it being served from, right? And the reason that that's important is you can imagine a startup that sells NFTs going under, and maybe they forget to pay their Amazon Web Services bill or maybe they've gone under and they can't pay their AWS bill. And you can imagine you've paid a bunch of money to own a particular NFT, and then that content is just not being served anymore. And then that would really suck and probably lead to a lot of legal issues. And so that's one of the reasons that almost the vast majority of NFTs, when you go down to the storage layer, are actually stored on IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, which is one of the technologies that I work on. And the idea with IPFS is it's a decentralized storage system instead of being like AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, where those, one particular person is paying for this content to be stored in a particular place. With IPFS, you have this content stored across a variety of computers, and the availability of the content isn't dependent on any one particular server or any one particular company. And so for that reason, NFTs have actually been a great example of a fantastic use case for decentralized storage.
Thank you so much. And I have another question, but I'm going to go to Ryoma and then I'm going to come back to you. Ryoma, what are the opportunities for creators and consumers via NFTs? And what are you thinking about as you work in this space?
So for creators, if you take a look at the way that traditionally creators have been engaging with digital content, people are going on to ArtStation, DeviantArt, Behance, or maybe going on to stock photo sites to get distribution for the content as the main focus, or maybe going to social media also to get visibility. But there isn't really this eye towards, hey, how do I actually make money on this content that they're creating, right? Because that mindset around being able to monetize your content really never existed before. People go to social media, Instagrams, the Facebooks, just post their content, people can see it, that's great. In most cases, they don't even get attribution getting back to them to saying that they were the original creators. And for a lot of people, that's been fine because that was the status norm, right? So with NFTs, so that kind of changes the entire dynamic where they now have an opportunity to actually monetize their content that they're creating. So there's a bunch of marketplaces now out there, Maker's Place being one of them, where creators can go to not only mint their artworks, but to sell their content in a way that really has real concrete value for them. So, there's feedback coming from lots of creators out there saying, you know what, NFTs have changed my life because, I would be previously working contract gigs or doing creative design work for big companies and getting paid very little amounts to do it, don't have creative freedom, don't have financial freedom. But now with NFTs, a lot of people are quitting their jobs, making their own content whenever they want to, having that creative freedom and getting more money for the time that they spend towards making their work. So it's really creating a huge new opportunity for creators out there in a way that it really changes a lot of people's lives. Like people are becoming millionaires from creating their artworks alone. So from a creative standpoint, a huge opportunity out there for a lot of content creators. On the collector side of things, I would say that a big impact is on like the traditional collectors that are out there. You think about art or literature or sports memorabilia, all that kind of stuff has already happened before. But as the world becomes more digital, how does that impact the way that people think about collections or how they collect items? And so this NFT ecosystem provides that new future, which kind of brings together this question of how do you engage with these people that you're collecting from? Like, let's say like athletes or musicians or entertainers, you might engage with them previously by buying their, their like t-shirts or mugs or something, or go to their social media and engage with them and try to show support there. NFTs provides this new avenue where you can provide a different mechanic to engage between the creator and the collectors themselves, where they can show support and really have something that's tangible in a new medium beyond what existed before as a way to engage with them. So both from a collector perspective and a creator perspective, it's opening up a whole bunch of different doors for people to get into.
Absolutely. And Marta, I would love to hear your perspective, thinking about your extensive experience in IP, about what creators need to be thinking about as they are minting these NFTs, so many of which repurpose copyrighted material. And I just, right now, it seems a little bit like the wild, wild west in terms of how all of this content is being used, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think from an intellectual property perspective, I think that, there is that big misunderstanding that I had previously talked about, which is this idea that when you buy an NFT, you're actually buying the intellectual property rights. In reality, that's what you're doing has nothing to do with IP at all. And to the extent that there is any transfer of IP or IP rights or licensing, that all happens in the terms of service. Now, there are a bunch of different efforts right now to sort of standardize how NFT licensing happens. But right now, it's really completely dependent on the terms of service of any particular platform. And so it's really kind of across, it really varies quite a lot what the terms actually are. And so I think it's important to understand when you buy an NFT or when you're minting an NFT, when you're buying an NFT, what rights are you actually getting, right? So that you're not accidentally effectively violating a contract. Or if you're minting an NFT, what rights are you actually giving up? And I think it's also good to know that if you are minting an NFT, you don't have to give up those intellectual property rights. Like you could still retain the rights to the underlying work, even though someone owns the NFT, and just, license it in a particular way. But the reason I think that that's particularly important is because, and I think this is something that is really underutilized, if you can retain the rights to the underlying work, that means you can actually use an open source type license. Like, for example, you could Creative Commons license the underlying work. So even though you're making an NFT of it and making money that way, you can still use Creative Commons. You can still use these open licensing mechanisms, which I think are really important to the sort of ethos of the space. And so I think that's one thing that's really been underutilized. I'd really like to see more NFTs be Creative Commons licensed.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. And Andrew, I know tokens.com has been very active investing in virtual real estate, NFTs, and play to earn games. And I'm wondering why you've chosen to focus in these areas.
As a company, that's what we do. We're a Web3 investment company and business builder. But really, the way we've worked and where my career has come from is taking various assets and businesses and making them available to public market investors. And so my previous company is still one of the world's largest Bitcoin miners. Took that public, it trades on the NASDAQ. And in this company, tokens.com, it's about making Web3 assets available to investors. Where we've received a lot of attention recently is through our metaverse real estate purchases. And I think, listening to what everyone says, I think we do that and take a different approach in that we're buying the metaverse real estate and finding ways to create revenue off it. And so we received a lot of attention late last year for doing, at the time, the largest metaverse real estate purchase in history in the fashion district of Decentraland, which is a Web3 enabled metaverse. We've turned that around, and now we're hosting later this month what is going to be a very large fashion week, the Metaverse's first fashion week. There's brands like Dolce & Gabbana, Tommy Hilfiger, Forever 21 who are participating. There's close to 40 brands. There's going to be after parties hosted. There's going to be musicians and DJs. We're being compensated for that as sort of a virtual landlord. We've taken it even a bit further. We announced last week that we struck a deal with Skechers, which is the third largest running shoe company in the world, for them to be a tenant. And so they're compensating us to use our land in the fashion district of in the metaverse to create a virtual storefront. And so the way I'm thinking about the interaction with NFTs is we can assist them to build certain NFTs. I'm sure maybe people heard about Adidas and Steph Curry teaming up to do an NFT running shoe that sold out in about a minute, I think raised over $20 million. We're working with companies and brands. We want to be really the one-stop shop for brands, celebrities, sports figures, entertainers, that they can come to us and we can help them create various things in the metaverse and really allow them to fulfill what their dreams are, and as a way of advertising to people. And it's really important for these brands because, a lot of the people using the metaverse aren't people who watch TV. They're not reading magazines, and they're doing all their shopping online. And so the metaverse, which is really a form of social media combined with gaming and blockchain, is a way for brands to communicate with these consumers. It's a way to advertise and create a new revenue stream.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, Alan, from your perspective, what are the new infrastructure needs that are required to support all of this activity in the space?
Yeah, that could go on for a while. Or maybe I can try and summarize this and kind of maybe bringing this back to at least an NFT perspective, right? Like you can think about sort of the token life cycle, creation or minting, transfer of ownership, trading, holding, and custody, right? And I'm only going to talk about the technical parts. Martha can talk about the legal and other aspects of this. But if you think about that token life cycle, right? This life cycle itself is underpinned by a lot of infrastructure and services. Like on the consumer front, right? There are virtual stores, be it the metaverse or hosted virtual stores where these tokens are actually showcased, right? There are the actual blockchains on which these tokens are minted. Some exist, some new blockchains are forming specifically for these purposes. There are secondary marketplaces that then enable the transfer and trading of these NFTs or tokens, and then wallets, right, which ultimately enable the custody of these tokens. And you can think about each of these as infrastructure components and services that are necessary. Some of this infrastructure exists. Other areas exist sort of in an MVP fashion that needs to be built. But I think most importantly, there's a user experience layer, a protection against fraud and safety aspects layer that still needs to be built. You can call that infrastructure, but it's a layer that needs to be built on top of this life cycle to really sort of take this to the next mainstream level, right? Versus just kind of where in the early phases that we are. And businesses are going to have, different entry points into each of these infrastructure services. For example, does a business actually build its own wallet? Do they integrate with existing wallets, right? Or do they leverage services from certain providers? So I think there's still a lot of infrastructure beyond what exists today that needs to be built. And it's going to be an ongoing journey, and it's going to be shaped by largely which use cases and which applications become more prominent, and that'll drive which pieces of infrastructure are prioritized.
Thank you so much. And we are getting a ton of questions actually from the audience. So I'm going to pause and insert one of them in here. I think many of you probably have perspectives on this, but often when we talk about art, questions of money laundering come up. And that has definitely been a topic of conversation related to NFTs. How are platforms addressing that risk? Anyone?
I'm happy to start. I mean, so it is one of the defining characteristics that when you want to start to when you want to implement, scale systems that meet societal expectations, laws, and regulations, right? You always boil it down to some basics, right? People want to know that someone can fix it when it goes wrong, that there's recourse available. There's, certainly when you get to scale, right, there's a call center, there's someone you can call, right? I've had an issue, I've had a problem. But another dimension is, we continue, and community by community continue to want to have mechanisms to fight financial crime, right? And so it's that the approaches, the requirements, the constructs vary country by country. There's some that are common and consistent. And when there is the potential for financial crime, there's a base need and expectation to have some sort of organized onboarding process to be able to compare against things like the OFAC list or check source of funds or various mechanisms of basics of financial crime management that as systems get into into scale delivery have to find ways to meet them. That is, it's bread and butter for the domains that start working from modernization and transformation of core infrastructure, right? Existing financial infrastructure, existing enterprise systems. They live this day in and day out. This is the chief risk officer, chief compliance officer's domain. They live it, and they're applying a certain set of techniques to advance it. For the cryptocurrency space and the permissionless systems, it's a challenge that is continuing to be focused on to find ways to both satisfy those fundamental needs to have financial crime management, law, recourse, auditability, transparency, while still maintaining the core ethos of being able to support more democratic, decentralized constructs. There's a lot of innovation left to go in that space to get to a point, and I think the natural outcome is we're going to meet somewhere in the middle, right? We're going to, we're gonna modernize things that have just been around for too long, and we need to dump on the head the orthodoxies of this just the way we've always done it. And at the same time, we need to take what's very frequently been happy path innovation, which is super easy to do when it all works right. But the minute it breaks, that's when it doesn't scale. And so it's a really important part of this innovation wave where we're going to end up meeting in the middle is what I think is inevitable.
One of the things that's interesting, there's often questions about money laundering and nefarious activity in crypto. It's actually one of the worst ways to do things like that, because everything can be traced back to a wallet that lives on a blockchain, and the currency that is most used for money laundering and nefarious activities is the US dollar, by far, by a wide margin. Certainly the potential resides within any currency for nefarious activity, but I believe crypto has received a bad label, probably widespread by governments and people who are threatened by it, as opposed to people who are knowledgeable about how it's used and how it works.
Ryoma, did you have anything else to add on that, or Marta?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say
ahead.
something similar to what Andrew was saying, is that, yeah, I mean, because it's trackable, it's a lot less attractive from an actual money launderer's perspective compared to US dollars, where it's like physically you can change hands relatively easy without anybody knowing that's happening. So yeah, very true. But there are still government regulations around that, that at least from a marketplace standpoint, that we're mindful of. At least on a case-by-case basis, like working with creators that are caring about that kind of stuff, making sure that they're selling to known individuals sometimes is very important to them. And so in that kind of case, we actively make steps to make sure that we know who the collectors are before they're able to actually purchase it. And so like in this Web3 space, like purchasing becomes a little bit tricky, because this idea about Web3 is around having your own control, having decentralization. And part of that is sort of having this idea of anonymity. And so, you don't necessarily need to have an account or an identity attached to a wallet to purchase anything, right? So from that perspective, it's sort of like you can purchase anonymously. And so like, how do you really track identities around that effectively to one person or like an actual individual? It's tough to do.
Absolutely. Marta, any other thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's all. I mean, I think exactly what Ryoma and Andrew said is exactly right. That fundamentally, it's a terrible technology to use to commit a crime. There's a public ledger that where all of the transactions are recorded, and I think that's why you've seen that there have been a lot of examples of people using cryptocurrencies or blockchains to commit crimes and then very, very quickly getting caught. So it makes total sense to me. And I think Andrew's point is a good one, that the technology that's most often used to commit crimes is cash, like is US dollars. And fundamentally, and so I think these are all very good points, and also, for what it's worth, even if a technology can be used to commit crimes, I think that doesn't mean that it's something that is that we should call for a ban on, right? Like, we don't blame Ford when its cars are used as the getaway vehicle in a bank robbery, right? So all of these points were really great ones, I think.
Thank you so much. So another question we got from the audience was about the NFT that you've seen that you think is the most interesting or the most compelling, or what the most promising use cases for NFTs are that you've seen. So not everyone has to answer, but I would love to hear from any and all of you who have an opinion on that. I think you probably have great perspectives.
I think it's the NFT technology that's most impressive. You can do all kinds of things. I don't want the audience to think about an NFT as just being a collectible of a picture that trades around. The technology behind it is actually far more profound. And I think we've been touching on that. You can link it to physical goods, you can link it to things. In fact, if you think about the metaverse is just a collection of NFTs put together with rules. The thought of NFT technology, which is a digital signature that can be applied to something digital, will and is applying to far more than just collectible pictures of Bored Apes and CryptoPunks that can be traded. It's going to apply to much more than that. Well, you'll be able to link it to things like music, your identity, some of your health things, or physical assets that you want, as well as digital assets. And so it's not necessarily about what is my favorite picture that's been created as an NFT. I think the technology is far more profound than that. And if I was to leave one thing with the audience, is don't think of NFTs as like collectible things. There's a profound technology here that's going to really evolve and steadily infiltrate almost all aspects of our life.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. Ryoma, I saw you had unmuted. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I guess in terms of like a notable NFT that comes to mind is like the Beeple piece, obviously, which kind of really brought NFTs into the mainstream, and getting Christie's to legitimatize the idea about NFTs was a huge moment across the industry. And so, that was a great pivotal moment, historical around NFTs, but looking towards the future, the space is very, very early still. And so when we think about like how the NFTs have been used now, it's like the use cases are what, like, it's for investment potential, or you buy plots of land in digital economy and then showcase your artworks there, or you just buy a physical frame and then you showcase it on your wall. And that, that's probably like the majority of the use case that exists now. But there are growing use cases around that as more games start to adopt NFTs, as more apps and services start to incorporate NFTs. That entire dynamic around how NFTs can be used will be a huge opportunity that it's not explored right now. And so, like, kind of seeing what's in the future, it's hard to say because so much of it is so unexplored right now. And it's super exciting where we're headed.
I'll take it. Let me layer into, I love those two. Let me layer in a different, whole different dimension and kind of, I like Andrew's widening. We need to widen our aperture as to what's involved. We've got the first governmental approved usage of tokenized credential, right, for border crossing. So that ability to take the data that's on the chip in your passport and turn that into a token that you can hold in a digital identity wallet that you can then share in advance with a border control agency to pre-approve your passage, into a new country and facilitate movement, right? The whole notion of identity credentials, I think, is wildly powerful when we then marry that with how we're actually going to change our physical and digital world experiences.
Absolutely. And Dave, and perhaps Alim, I'd love to hear also from your perspective how NFTs have kind of created a bridge to other types of blockchain-enabled technologies in your experience at the enterprise level.
Yeah, maybe I'll start, Dave, and you can chime in. The way I see this, right, is that these are now becoming sort of the use cases for which blockchains are really valuable, right? But they're sort of under the covers, right? And in some sense, blockchain technology, in my view, was meant to be that, right? It's sort of underlying plumbing, underlying substrate that enables all of these new things without necessarily people having to sort of go down to a protocol level, blockchain protocol level, and understand it to use it, right? So I think NFTs are just one example, at least in the collectible consumer side, to say you can do all of these things where this thing lives on a blockchain, but that's all right? In terms of words, you just say it lives on a blockchain, and the rest, it just works, just like electricity, it just works, right? And in that sense, I think it's really powerful to sort of start seeing some of these use cases come to bear, where the underlying plumbing can just be expected to work, and it's just sort of expected to be there.
I think the other thing, just laying on to that, the other thing that's super important as this whole innovation wave develops is ultimately we want people to be able to move from metaverse place to place to place and bring with them their identity credentials and and currency and the variety of tokens that they own. Those standards and that interoperability to be able to particularly move from ledger to ledger to ledger. It's one of the things that we're investing heavily into with open source is key. Hyperledger Cactus, we're the primary contributor to and continue to maintain, to be able to start to have that suite of capabilities to be able to go from ledger to ledger to ledger to ultimately seamlessly enable what Alim is referencing. Is we don't want to subject anyone to well, what ledger is it on? When we're actually talking about consumer experiences for the average person, getting this whole new wave of products and services. And so interoperability, the connective tissues that will sit in between these places, is all being super important. I'll give a shout out to the Interwork Alliance, as part of the GBBC family, working on those, but working on the taxonomy and the common language, the frameworks for tokens, so that we can have, we need to make this as much as open source, standards based, connective tissue, so that as we have these islands of implementation of really cool metaverse places that pop up, that ability to actually think from an end user perspective of how do I traverse between them, and actually think about it from the end user, not from the traditional walled garden of the owner of the platform or the place.
Absolutely. And Marta, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what additional functionality and ownership we can all look forward to, not just now in terms of Web3 capabilities, but a few years in the future? What should we be excited about?
Yeah, so I mean, I think well beyond NFTs, I think there's so many interesting things going on in Web3 and the decentralized web space. So, for example, I talked a little bit earlier about how IPFS, why it is that most NFTs are stored on IPFS, or stored on a decentralized storage platform. And I think that's just one example of sort of how, why it's so important to have a different version of the web. So, as I mentioned, today's internet is really centralized. So the vast majority of data that's making up the websites that you use is owned by basically either AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. So like if you're clicking on a link, almost always you're going to be retrieving that content from a data warehouse owned by one of those three companies. And we often see those companies suffer blackouts, right? So like a few weeks ago, AWS went down and people's like toasters stopped working, right? And so that's just an example of having of a problem with having these single points of failure. And so I think, one of the things that we work on with IPFS and Filecoin is creating a better version of the web where you can combine the storage capacity and computing power on all of our individual devices into a supercomputer-like network. And you can store multiple copies of data across those devices. And that way, on this decentralized version of the internet, websites will stay up and content will stay up even if some nodes fail, and the availability of information isn't dependent on any one server or company. And so that's just a much more robust platform for our information. And I think that's one of the most important things about the future of the decentralized web.
Absolutely. It's really incredible to see how quickly these changes are happening, and that I'm excited to see what happens in the next few years. Andrew, I know you have also focused a lot on these play to earn games, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about them and how they feature in this broader conversation of Web3.
Sure. So for the audience, traditional gaming, there's 400 million daily users of video games. And largely you use these platforms where you go in and play. Some of them, even like a Roblox, might have sort of an internal currency that you can use within the game, but nothing that translates after the game is over. Oftentimes you'll play these games with players around the world, and if you win, you have bragging rights. What's starting to happen is really fascinating, and it started picking up steam last year, where if you start migrating some of these games to blockchain and crypto technology, they can create their own ecosystem or economy within the game. So you can go and you can play the game, you buy the tokens to create your avatar, and you might use additional tokens to buy a sword or a shield. You play the game, and if you're successful in it, you're rewarded with more tokens. Now you can use those tokens and keep them. You can use those tokens and spend them within the game. Or, and this is the interesting part, you can sell them in an open market, you can convert them to US dollars or other things. It's that ability to transfer money in and out of the game. The biggest game doing this is called Axie Infinity, which is backed by Mark Cuban and Andreessen Horowitz. Last year, they had run rate revenue on this game by putting it together of close to $1 billion. This is a huge market. There's people all over the world who are making careers out of playing these games and making enough money that you can go earn your tokens and then sell them into the market. And that's very new. I foresee in the future that you'll be able to have almost like sports leagues where you can act like a general manager, where you'll be able to trade players, create players, play the game. And if you win and you're successful, you'll be rewarded by that in actual tokens that can be converted to fiat for use.
So cool. So we only have about 6 minutes left, and there are a ton of questions. So I'm going to ask one general question, and then we'll go around and have everyone answer a final question. But the general question is how quantum computing factors into all of this, and what we should be thinking about when we consider that it will become more ubiquitous in the next few years.
I've got the quantum. Yeah, I'm happy to take that one if the world wants to. So quantum computing, right, is in this is really in this sweet spot, or not sweet spot. It's in this tweener state of it's now actually able through quantum inspired techniques and the early actual quantum techniques, actually starting to be functional. But it's right at the beginning of that stage. And following a whole different pattern of Moore's law, it is taking off on a whole different trajectory. And so the ability to compute on a whole different level at a whole different speed, it tees up a whole new category of thinking and optimization that and unlocking a whole new degree of possibility of what you can compute. I'm inferring that from the question there's the security question around it of will quantum computing break current encryption? The really important thing to understand there is NIST actually put out this year the targets for post-quantum cryptography and the models for it, and the whole the entire enterprise world is now moving towards assessing their current exposure to the current RSA encryption mechanisms and putting it on a footing to then modernize to post-quantum cryptography standards, because it is going to happen at some point in the next coming years. There's wild debate as to whether it's 1, 2, 5, or 10 years away that existing encryption technique can be broken by quantum computing. Doesn't matter the date. It's a when, not if. And it's not a problem for all of the things that we're building now, because we're just building in quantum resistant cryptography into anything new. Massive problem for the existing infrastructure that's been built up over the past several decades that is that has encryption embedded throughout it that we have to go find. This is a actually none of our audience would live through this. I'm sadly old enough to have worked it, but go back and read history about the Y2K problem. This is a similar, we have to go find all the encryption, put it on a stance to modernize it, and do so without the benefit of a date or the actual the actual components to plug in. So you'll see a lot of emphasis and focus on this space in the coming months and years, as a massive update to all of our security infrastructure that needs to be underway. It is not a problem for the systems that are being built today, because we are anticipating and building with post-quantum cryptography at its heart. And then for those of you that want to be inspired around where this is headed next, in our labs R&D space, we are focused on biomimicry and turning theory into reality of 1 cubic centimeter of DNA can actually hold an exabyte's worth of data. And actually, if you think about what archaeologists are pulling out of the earth, it can store it for upwards of 700,000 years. And so the whole notion of biology mixing with computer science to give us the next generation of compute after that is also underway.
Thank you so much, Dave. And we are so grateful to everyone who has joined for this conversation. I'm going to ask if we can go around very quickly and let students know if they want to get involved in what you're doing at your individual companies, what they can do, if anything. So starting with you, Alim, if that's okay, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, we're happy to have people come inquire, and we'll share everything that we are doing in this space. Best way to do that is to go to the VMware blockchain website. There's an email alias there that you can email that'll come to our team. Any questions you have, anything you want to know, just feel free to do that. We're very open about what we're doing in this space, and we're looking for input and feedback. So go to the website vmwareblockchain.com, or I can't remember the exact terms, but just Google VMware blockchain, go to the website, pick up the email alias, and reach out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marta.
Yes, so all sorts of things, but one thing I just wanted to highlight is one of the orgs, so I work for the Filecoin Foundation, but also the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. And we actually have a job board of basically blockchain for social impact jobs. So check out the FFDW job board.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryoma.
Yeah, I would say if there's any content creators out there, definitely try to explore Makerspace as an option for you to start minting your content. For our collectors out there, if you're looking for interesting content, we're always doing unique drops. So come check us out. And yeah, we got like Snoop Dogg coming out today. So definitely check that one out as well. It'll be super interesting.
Absolutely. Andrew?
You can just go to our website, tokens.com. Very easy to remember. We have an education area there, a media tab if you want to find out about our activities in the metaverse space and the media we've been receiving around the fashion show that's coming up soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Dave?
You can start with, if you just do a search on Accenture Metaverse or Accenture Blockchain, you'll immediately get tapped into our materials. We just published our tech vision yesterday. Start with a read there. We are hiring like mad. Whether it's on the engineering, developer, or content side, we need 3D artists, animators, etc. So lots of opportunity. Please reach out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we also have a GBBC job board, which one of my colleagues has posted in the chat, where we have jobs from, I think, all of your companies posted. So if you're a student, if you're looking to get into the workforce, if you're interested in engaging in this space, please look there. And thank you all again so much for joining us. I look forward to our next conversation. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.